Welcome to today's lecture on the second Jefferson administration up to the lead into the War of 1812. Now, Jefferson's second administration began after the election of 1804, in which he won wildly. Remember, the Federalists after the 1800 election are in decline because of what they had done to the Democratic Republicans. And so Thomas Jefferson's running as a Democratic Republican in that election, and as you can see, 162 electoral votes to 14. Basically, the Federalist Party is wiped out on the national level. They still have votes at the local level, but on the national level, they are wiped out. And if you look at the map here in terms of popular vote, I just want to bring your attention to something. And that's that we're seeing more and more states decide that the people get to choose the electors. Remember, the original Constitution said the states will choose the electors and decide who that state wants to vote for president. But the people began to demand that they had the right to select the president. And so you see, for instance, Virginia, they're voting for president. Massachusetts, some of the other states are beginning to do this. And we're going to see that more and more. And by the 1830s, pretty much every state allows the people to choose the electors who are then going to choose the president. So another thing to note on this one is that Aaron Burr has been replaced. Of course, trying to kill one of the founding fathers, actually killing him, and then trying to do treason against the country, not a good look. And so he's replaced, and George Clinton becomes the vice president. So we're not going to hear from him much again. And his second term is not going to go as well as the first term, and this often happens with presidents, right? They have a very successful first term, and because you have a successful first term, you're going to get a second term. The problem is, in the second term, a lot of the problems that have been building up in your first 4 years come to a head, and you've got to deal with them. And so you very often don't have as successful a second term. And so you can look across parties, across time. That's kind of a rule of thumb. And so the things that are going to affect him are in many ways things that have affected presidents up to this time. Right? It's the foreign policy issues and America's desire for neutrality, but we're getting caught in these Napoleonic wars that are ongoing in France. And so you can see here, the French are blockading Britain. That's going to cause a problem because we need to trade with Britain. They're our biggest trading partner, but we also trade with France. And so what's the problem with that? The problem is that the British aren't going to want us to trade with them. And so we're caught in the middle between these two powers. And although we've kind of got ourselves functioning, we're still a weak little country in a world of powerhouses. And so we're going to be struggling, and it's going to continue to deteriorate until we hit the War of 1812 here. Remember, coming out of the Revolution, the war is over. But nobody really expects this thing to last. They're all expecting it's going to fail at some point, and when it fails, then they'll snatch up the crumbs that are left over. So the war in Europe is going to take a dramatic shift because of the Battle of Trafalgar. And again, this isn't a history of Napoleonic Wars class or anything, but this is an important battle because of the impact on the United States. So in 1805, Britain and France fought a battle, the Battle of Trafalgar at sea, and the British destroyed the French Navy. Now, the problem is Britain no longer has a naval enemy, but they still have an enemy in these wars. And so you have the biggest navy in the world, the British, fighting against the biggest and best army in the world, the French. And so what's the problem with that? Well, it's like a whale fighting an elephant, right? They're both the biggest on their natural environment, but there's no way for them to confront each other. And so they have to figure out a way to fight this war without a direct confrontation. And so Britain is going to issue orders in council. So these are orders directing a blockade of the French-controlled area of Europe. So you see on this map there, that sort of dotted line, the areas that are banned from importing British goods and vice versa. So those are the areas under the blockade. So in return, Napoleon's going to issue the Milan Decree. So this is his counter order, and this is ordering a blockade of the British. And so what's the problem for the United States? Well, we want to trade with both of them, but each one is going to attack us if we trade with their enemy. And so if American ships are caught trading with the French, the British are going to seize them. And if American ships are caught trading with the British, the French are going to seize them. And so we are getting caught in this thing in Jefferson's second term in a way that's making things very difficult for us to navigate. And so you can see this cartoon here of mimic or mocking Jefferson and coughing up money in to the French. And of course, up in the top, a hornet dressed as Napoleon, stinging him on the back quarter and spitting out money in order to try to, get access to this stuff diplomatically. It's not going to work. Now, in 1807, there's an incident. Remember, both sides are kind of attacking us, seizing our ships. And we're talking here about merchant ships primarily. But in 1807, there's an incident off of the coast of Virginia. So the USS Chesapeake is an American Navy ship. And shortly after it leaves harbor, a British ship, the HMS Leopard, is going to attack it. A number of people are going to be killed or wounded, and they're going to impress 14 sailors. Now, impressment is seizing people off the ship and forcing them into the Navy. So essentially think of it as drafting them into the British Navy. Now, the British Navy is a harsh environment. And essentially, being drafted in the British Navy is a death sentence. You're going to be there probably until you die. They're not going to let you go. And if your ship gets sunk, you're going to die that way. So it is very often a death sentence to be drafted into that Navy. And what the British would do is anytime they came across merchant ships, they would search them for British citizens, seize them, and draft them into the Navy because they had a constant need for new sailors. Sailors die and all of those things. And so they have this insatiable demand for sailors, and they're going to grab them off of ships. Well, this is a U.S. Navy ship, and when they seize the ship within sight of land, so Americans see this incident happen, they're going to impress 14 sailors into the British Navy. Now they're going to say, those are British citizens. Well, how do you tell a British citizen in 1807? We don't have, biometric scanning and, good passports or anything like that. And think about it, the accents of Americans have not drifted that far apart from the British. So you can't say, well, he has a British accent or something. And so basically, if the British say you're British, and they're going to seize you. And so they seize 14 sailors. Some of them might have been deserters from the British Navy. We don't know off the top of my head. But one of the things they do is they seize 3 African Americans. See, African Americans very often joined the U.S. Navy or got involved in shipping because it was an avenue for them to rise based upon their merits. We see a lot of African Americans involved in that. Young men could join the Navy, join Merchant Marine or something. And, think about it. On a sailing ship, what's the most important thing? Is it the color of your skin or your ability to be a good sailor and keep everybody alive? And so it was an area where you could rise. Now, there might be limitations how high, but there were people who became ship's captains and things like that, not in the Navy, but in the merchant service. And so 3 African Americans were seized, and they were clearly Americans. And so this became a diplomatic incident. And so we demanded the return of those 3 people because we knew they were American. And so as a result of this incident overall, American people are demanding war, right? This is a direct British Navy attack on a U.S. Navy ship, and they're demanding war. And Jefferson does not want to get involved in a war, right? He understands America is a weak power, and if we try to go up against the British, we're going to be in a bad position. And so he has to try to figure out a way to navigate this. And what he's going to do is go back to what we had done in his youth. Remember, he's involved in the American Revolution. And what had we done in the run-up to the American Revolution? We had used economic warfare to pressure the British. So Congress is going to pass the Embargo Act of 1807 in response to the seizures of American sailors as well as ships in general. And so this places a complete embargo on American shipping. Basically, we're going to cut off American trade. Now, we're trying to put economic pressure on the British and the French to a degree to back down on these things. But who's it going to hurt? Think about it. America relies on trading. American ships are carrying cargo all over the world. And if we cut that off, our economy is going to crumble. And so the question is, does our economy crumble faster than the British give in? That's the challenge. And as we're going to see, it's a complete disaster for the American economy, much faster than it is a disaster for the British. And so if you look at this cartoon here in the slide, you see foreign trade drops in 1 year from 108 million down to 22 million. So basically, 1/5 of our foreign trade. And you can see on that chart to the left, the collapse of trade on the part of America. And so as a result of that, we have essentially an economic depression, especially in the North. The South doesn't necessarily like it because they want to export their cash crops. The North doesn't like it because they're the ones carrying crops as well as importing, exporting goods. And so if you look at this cartoon here, right, it's the happy effects of the grand system of shutting ports against the English. So what do we see? We see a crowd of probably New England shipping owners going to the president and demanding his help. And as they're relaying the problems of their family and they're starving to death and everything, he's giving them a highfalutin speech about how if we only wait for a certain time, then eventually the British will give in, and you can read the whole script there. Jefferson's known for his linguistic abilities, right? He wrote the Declaration of Independence, and so that's kind of what it's mocking here is his flowery language. And in the face of that, people are facing economic misery. And if you look in behind Jefferson, who's whispering in his ear? Napoleon. You shall be king hereafter, right? So he's at least according to this propaganda, right? He's a puppet of the French. And then down below, what do you see? A dog saying bow wow. There's always a dog in these cartoons, so keep an eye out for it. So anyway, this is an economic disaster for America. And going into the next election, he's not going to run. He's done his 2 terms, just like Washington. So he's not going to run, but it's going to be James Madison running on the same ticket. So James Madison, father of the Constitution, running against Charles Pinckney again for the Federalists. And as you see on this map, the Federalists are going to rebound a little bit. They're thinking in 1808, hey, maybe we're going to come out of this thing. Spoiler alert, they're not. This is kind of the high water mark. But in 1808, kind of looks like maybe they're going to be able to gain power again at some point in the future. And they've gained their traditional area, which is what? The New England area, and then the port reliant areas. Okay, you see around the Chesapeake Bay there, those areas were known as Federalist support areas. And the Embargo Act is the big issue of this campaign. Regardless of this resurgence of the Federalist Party, Pinckney is completely defeated in this thing. And it points out another issue that we're starting to see in this early national period. Remember, what had Jefferson been before he became president? He had been Secretary of State. Now, Madison had been Secretary of State under President Jefferson, and now he has been elected president. And so there's nothing written in stone, but can you see how they begin to imagine that the route to the presidency is through the Secretary of State? And we're going to see that continue on, that trend, and it's going to be important later in our story here. So that's why I'm pointing it out here. Madison is the Secretary of State, and now he is the president. And as I said, once again, people are demanding the right to vote. So you see in this one, a few more places allowing the people to choose the electors. And that's a trend that's going to continue and get larger as we move forward here. Now, James Madison has the same problems internationally that Jefferson does. And that Embargo Act is a complete debacle. So he's going to withdraw that act and pass a replacement, the Non-Intercourse Act. So think of this as a relaxed embargo. But I want you to think about this. If the full embargo didn't put pressure on Britain to back down, is it likely that a kind of sorta embargo is going to put pressure on them to back down? But understand what Madison's trying to do here is relax it so we can get business going again, but it's not going to work. And so, over the course of the next year or so, we still have these problems, Americans being seized by the British, the French bothering us as well, all of those things. And so in 1810, we're going to pass a law called Macon's Bill number 10. This repeals that Non-Intercourse Act, but we put a stipulation going forward. And the stipulation is this: if one of those countries, Britain or France, will agree to give up on these intrusions on our neutrality, then we will give all our trade to them, and we will focus all our negative energy towards the other one. So we're gonna, if Britain backs down, we're gonna go back to trading with them, and now we will embargo France. On the other hand, if France backs down, we're gonna shift and put all our effort and embargo against the British. Now, if we do that, how is that going to be perceived by the losing side? It's going to be perceived as an act of war almost, right? Because we're taking side with their enemy. And Napoleon understands this. And so he's going to pretend to comply with it and say, yes, I'm going to follow the requirements of this Macon's Bill number 2. And so what does Madison have to do? Proclaim non-intercourse with Great Britain. And that's really the thing that's going to start the ball rolling towards this war with Great Britain here in just a couple of years. So really about a year from now. So we kind of get trapped into this. Napoleon's a smart guy, and he's trying to figure out a way to get us to functionally be on the same side as him. Now, in the background of this, we still have ongoing struggles with the Indians out in the West. And during this period of time, there was a rising movement led by the chief Tecumseh and his brother, the prophet. So you can think of it as the military wing of this movement and the religious wing of this movement. And they were beginning to build an alliance of all the Indian tribes out there to prevent continued settlement out in the old Northwest area. So think about this. They're not strong enough individually to stand up to these settlers, but if they all join together, they have quite a bit of power and maybe they can influence things. So that's kind of the goal that Tecumseh and his brother have. So they begin to rally the Indian tribes in the Northwest. So think of the states of Indiana, Illinois, that region there. And in 1811, Tecumseh is going to leave to go down to the south to rally the tribes down there in the area of, say, Mississippi, Alabama, that region. So we're talking about the Choctaw and the Cherokee and some of those other tribes. And so Tecumseh is going to leave, but he's going to leave his brother in charge. One stipulation he's going to put on the brother is don't get involved in a war yet. We're not ready. Wait till I come back and we have an alliance of all the tribes, and then we can stand up to these settlers. And, I'm going down to the south. Specifically, he wants to talk to the Creek Indians, so that's kind of Alabama and that region at this time. So he leaves, and on his way down, at about the same time, there's a massive earthquake. It's the New Madrid Fault, which is running around the Mississippi region around Memphis, Tennessee, that region there, a massive earthquake. Now, if it happened today, maybe millions of people would die. It'd be very deadly. But at that time, it's a fairly empty part of the country. But it was a massive earthquake and had completely changed the course of the Mississippi River for a period of time. Supposedly the river ran backwards because of, damming it up in the midst of this earthquake, and just terrible things. Now, for us, we would understand that as an earthquake. But for the tribes, especially the Creek tribes, some of them see it as an omen. And they see it as an omen to support Tecumseh. So they're ready to jump on side with Tecumseh in this struggle against these settlers coming out into the western area. But in the meantime, back up in the north, the brother disregards Tecumseh's orders and rallies the forces at hand to attack the American army. So the American army kind of knows stuff's going on out there. We have a tiny little army, but the governor of the region, William Henry Harrison, leads a small force of American Army troops out into that region, and they are camped, as you see at this place called Tippecanoe. They're just in camp there. They're not conducting a battle, but Tecumseh's brother rallies his forces. Remember, he's kind of the religious part of this movement, and he's telling the warriors, hey, don't worry, their bullets can't kill you. Now, we all know bullets can kill you. And so they attack the American force out there, and they are just slaughtered, as you would expect. The Americans are in a defensive position, and they're attacked by people who are lightly armed, and they're just destroyed. And so with that, this movement out in the west is going to begin to collapse. And so by the time Tecumseh comes back, he's not going to have the force, the number of warriors, all of that stuff that he had when he had left. And so it's going to create some problems that those Creeks down in the south we're going to come back to when we talk about the War of 1812. So that's why it's kind of important to mention their decision there. So in the aftermath of this, there's going to be some additional battles, and eventually Tecumseh is going to be killed. Now, supposedly, there's this thing called Tecumseh's curse. And so I'm going to tell you it's a myth, but I want to explain it to you because you may hear this at some point in your lifetime, and so let's just get it out of the air now and discuss it. So, Tecumseh's curse. Now, supposedly, when Tecumseh was killed, at the time he was killed, he placed a curse on the United States. And the curse is that any president who is elected in a year that ends with a 0, now why he would choose that, who knows? But any president who's elected in a year that ends with a 0 is going to die in office. And so let's look at that. 1811, 1812, 1815, right? Let's go up to the next election after that takes place on a year ending in a 0. So 1840, William Henry Harrison, you see on the picture here, William Henry Harrison is elected president. And as we're going to discuss later, he is sworn in as president and he dies about 30 days later. Okay, so that's 1840. The next election that ends in a 0 is 1860. So who's elected in 1860? Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln is assassinated in office. So let's go forward. It works out, it's every 20 years, so 1880 is the next one. Who's elected president? James Garfield. James Garfield is assassinated about 9 months later. So move forward 20 years, 1900, William McKinley is elected president. And in 1901, he is assassinated. Another 20 years, 1920, who's elected president? Harding. Harding dies probably of a heart attack in 1923 while he's in office. Let's go forward again. 1940, who's elected president? Franklin Roosevelt. What happens to Franklin Roosevelt? 1945, he dies of health complications. We'll just put it that way. So move ahead another 20 years. 1960, who's elected president? John F. Kennedy. What happens to John F. Kennedy? He's assassinated in 1963. 20 more years. 1980. Ronald Reagan is elected president. That following year, somebody attempts to assassinate him. He's shot. He very nearly dies. And so we can kind of say that's the end of the curse, right? Because 2000, 2020, neither of those die in office. So if you want to believe in that curse, go ahead. Maybe it's true. Who knows? So anyway, we're going to get into the War of 1812 in class. I'm going to leave off on this slide and we'll just leave it there.